The inheritance of my grandmother's Victorian house was supposed to be a fresh start. For me, Maya, it was a sanctuary. For my Aunt Clara and cousin Simon, it was an injustice. The heavy oak door had barely closed behind me on move-in day when their disapproval began to sour the air. "It's far too much house for a young woman on her own," Clara declared, her voice sharp as she ran a finger over the mantelpiece, checking for dust. Her son, Simon, a man in his 30s with a perpetual smirk, nodded in agreement. "Should have been sold. The proceeds split fairly." Their definition of fairness, I knew, excluded me. I was the dreamy granddaughter, the one who preferred books and solitude to their grasping social climbers. My saving grace, my anchor in the storm of their resentment, was Luna. My beautiful, sleek Siamese cat with sapphire eyes and a quiet, regal dignity. She wove herself through the unpacked boxes, claiming the sunbeams that fell through the stained glass windows. "You and your menagerie," Simon sneered, watching her. "Grandmother's antique furniture and a cat that sheds. A perfect match." I held Luna closer, feeling her purr vibrate against my chest. They didn't understand. This wasn't just a house, it was a legacy of love, and Luna was my family. The house itself was a character in our drama. It was full of whispers and memories, from the creak of the third stair to the way the morning light hit the kitchen pantry. My grandmother had been a collector of beautiful, slightly eccentric things, and every corner held a story. Clara saw only the monetary value. She'd pick up a porcelain figurine, quote an auction price, and set it down with a sigh. She never had a head for business, your grandmother. Sentimental to a fault. I bit my tongue, knowing that sentiment was the very thing that had sustained me through lonely years. Luna, instinctively, seemed to understand the house's soul. She found the warmest spots on the Persian rugs and the best vantage points on the window seats, from which she would observe Clara and Simon with an unnerving, intelligent stillness. Their visits became more frequent, their criticisms more pointed. They'd suggest realtors, talk about market trends, and make not-so-subtle comments about the costs of upkeep. I began to feel like a caretaker in my own home, a temporary resident awaiting eviction by the true heirs, in their own eyes. The tension was a thin, constant hum in the background of my new life. The first open conflict occurred over dinner. I had made a simple pasta, trying to maintain a semblance of family cordiality. Clara spent the meal detailing the fantastic offer a developer had supposedly made for the entire street. They'd knock it all down, of course. Build modern townhouses. A fortune to be made. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft from the old window frame. "I'm not selling, Aunt Clara. This is my home." Simon dropped his fork with a clatter. "Your home? You lived in a tiny apartment before this. You have no idea what it takes to maintain a place like this. It's a burden. You'll be buried under repair bills." It was then that Luna, as if sensing the rising hostility, jumped onto the empty chair next to me and fixed her blue eyes on Simon. He recoiled slightly. "I hate the way that thing stares at you," he muttered. "It's not natural." In that moment, I saw their strategy clearly. They would wear me down, financially and emotionally, until I capitulated. But their disdain for Luna solidified my resolve. She was the one pure, good thing in this battle, and I would protect her. The incident that changed everything happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I had run to the grocery store, leaving Luna napping on my bed. The house was peaceful when I left. When I returned an hour later, the peace was shattered. I knew immediately something was wrong. The air was too still. I called for Luna, but there was no answering chirp, no soft patting of feet. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I found her under my bed, deep in the shadows, trembling uncontrollably. I coaxed her out gently, my heart breaking at the fear in her eyes. It was then I saw it. One of her front claws had been brutally clipped too short. A tiny spot of blood had welled and dried on the delicate pink quick. Rage, hot and immediate, flooded my veins. I stormed into the living room, where Clara and Simon sat pretending to read the paper. "What did you do to her?" My voice was a low shake. Simon didn't even look up. The stupid thing must have caught it on something. Clumsy animal. But my eyes fell on the side table. There, next to Clara's teacup, was a pair of pet nail clippers. And on my aunt's face was not concern or denial, but a look of cold, grim satisfaction. The confrontation was brief and icy. I held up the clippers. "Care to explain these?" Clara's smile was thin and venomous. "We were trying to help. Those claws are destructive to antique wood. We were just looking out for the value of the estate." The lie was so transparent it was an insult. They had hurt her to hurt me. It was a message. Asterisk, we can touch what you love. This isn't your safe place. Asterisk, I didn't argue. I simply turned, gathered a still trembling Luna into her carrier, and drove to the emergency vet. The confirmation of the intentional injury from the vet, the soft bandage on her paw, the pain medication, it all crystallized my purpose. The time for passive resistance was over. As I drove home through the dark streets, with Luna sleeping fitfully in the passenger seat, a plan began to form in my mind. They thought I was a sentimental girl. They thought Luna was just a pet, a weakness. They were about to learn that they had grievously misjudged us both. Luna's recovery was slow. She was skittish, jumping at sudden noises, and she now viewed the common areas of the house with suspicion. Her trust had been broken. My heart ached for her, and that ache fueled a cold, focused anger. I started paying closer attention to Clara and Simon's conversations. They thought I was distracted, but I was listening. Their whispers about money were constant. Simon had gambling debts. Clara's husband had left her with nothing. Their obsession with the house wasn't just about greed. It was about desperation. And then I heard the phrase that would become the cornerstone of my plan: grandmother's secret stash. It was a family legend, a story about my grandmother hiding a significant amount of cash or valuables somewhere in the house during a period of distrust in banks. Most of the family dismissed it as a fairy tale. But Clara and Simon, in their avarice, clung to it. They truly believed a fortune was hidden within the walls they were so desperate to sell. The genesis of my revenge was simple. I would give them exactly what they wanted. I would dangle the myth of the hidden treasure right in front of them. Using Luna as my unwitting prop, I began a subtle theatrical campaign. I started spending more time in the cellar, a dusty, labyrinthine space full of my grandmother's stored memories. I would bring Luna down with me, her curiosity overcoming her fear as she sniffed at old trunks and woven baskets. I began having hushed, one-sided phone calls in the hallway, just within earshot of where they Saturday. Yes, the third brick from the left, behind the old furnace, I'd murmur while stroking Luna's back. No, I haven't moved it yet. It needs to be handled carefully. I bought a small, weighty lockbox from a second-hand store and made a show of carefully placing it on a shelf in the cellar, always with Luna weaving around my ankles, as if she were guarding it. The bait was taken faster than I anticipated. I noticed Clara's eyes following me with a new, sharp intensity. Simon began offering to help me with chores in the cellar, his eyes scanning the walls and floor with a hunter's focus. Their greed was a palpable force in the house. I had to be meticulous. I purchased 2 small, discreet wireless security cameras online. One I positioned on a high shelf in the cellar, aimed at the area around the old furnace. The other I placed in the main hallway, covering the cellar door. The stage was set. I began to drop more specific clues. I left an old, cryptic-looking map I'd drawn on parchment paper, half sticking out of a book. It pointed to the cellar. I started moving the lockbox to different, slightly more obscure locations, each time making sure one of them saw me doing it with a furtive, secretive air. The final act of the play required my absence. I announced I was going away for a long weekend to visit a friend in a neighboring city. I packed a bag with theatrical solemnity. I just need to get away from all this tension, I told Clara, who practically vibrated with suppressed excitement. On the Friday morning, I made a great show of leaving, making sure to accidentally leave the cellar door slightly ajar. I drove around the block and then walked to my friend Sarah's house, which was just 2 streets over. From her laptop, I had a perfect real-time view of the cameras. I didn't have to wait long. Within an hour of my supposed departure, Clara and Simon were creeping down the cellar stairs, flashlights in hand. The hunt was on. Watching them on the screen was a surreal experience. They were like characters in a bad heist movie, but the malice in their intent was very real. They started with the area around the furnace, their whispers picked up by the camera's microphone. She said the 3rd brick, Clara hissed, running her hands over the mortar. Simon, stronger and more brutish, didn't have the patience for subtlety. He produced a crowbar from behind his back. The first splintering crack of wood, as he pried up a floorboard, made me flinch. For hours they worked. They tapped walls, listening for hollow sounds. They pulled up the beautiful, aged floorboards my grandfather had laid by hand. They knocked holes in the plaster and lathe, their faces becoming streaked with dust and sweat. They were destroying the very history they claimed to value, all for a phantom fortune. Luna, who had come with me to Sarah's, sat on the desk beside the laptop, watching the destruction of her home with wide, unblinking eyes. The devastation they left in their wake was comprehensive. They had transformed the cellar from a place of dusty nostalgia into a war zone. The floor was a ruin of splintered wood and gaping holes. The walls were pockmarked with crumbled plaster. They had even dismantled part of the old coal chute. They found nothing, of course. As the night wore on, their frantic energy turned to exhausted frustration, and then to a bitter, silent rage. Finally, as dawn approached, they gave up. They trudged upstairs, leaving the cellar door open, their figures slouched in defeat on the camera feed. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. They had taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker. They had shown their true colors not as concerned family members, but as vandals and thieves. The evidence was now irrefutable. I returned home on Sunday evening as planned. I allowed my face to morph into an expression of perfect, horrified shock as I stood at the top of the cellar stairs. Clara and Simon hurried from the living room, their faces a pathetic mask of feigned concern. "Maya, thank God you're home. We heard a terrible noise last night. We think it was burglars." Clara cried, wringing her hands. "They must have been looking for something. We called the police, but they found nothing." I didn't reply. I simply looked from their lying faces to the destroyed cellar and back again. Then I walked to the hall table, picked up my tablet, and opened the security app. I turned the screen to face them. There they were, in high definition, wielding the crowbar, prying up the floorboards. The color drained from their faces. That's a violation of our privacy." Simon blustered, but the fight had gone out of him. I picked up my phone and dialed the real police. The official response was swift and satisfying. The officers who arrived took one look at the video in the cellar, and their professional neutrality cracked. It was clearly not a burglary. It was a deliberate, malicious destruction of property. Clara and Simon were read their rights in my own foyer. The look of utter shock and betrayal on Clara's face as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists was a moment I would savor for a long time. They were taken to the station for processing. I spent the evening giving my statement, the tablet with the video evidence held carefully in an evidence bag. The sergeant assured me the case was open and shut. I returned to my wounded house, the silence feeling cleaner than it had in months. Luna, sensing the shift, emerged from her hiding spot and rubbed against my legs, her purr a soft engine of approval. The legal machinery ground into motion. My lawyer, a formidable woman named Ms. Evans, was delighted with the video evidence. "We have them on willful destruction of property, trespassing, and attempting to file a false police report," she said, her eyes gleaming. We filed for a restraining order immediately, which was granted without hesitation. Clara and Simon were now legally barred from coming within 500 feet of my home. The criminal charges proceeded, and their lawyer, seeing the hopelessness of their case, advised them to plead guilty to avoid a trial. The judge, a stern woman unimpressed by their excuses, ordered them to pay full restitution for the damages, which the contractor's estimates placed in the tens of thousands of dollars. Furthermore, they were sentenced to community service. Their reputations in our small community were left in tatters. The repairs to the cellar were a cathartic process. I hired a restoration specialist who appreciated the house's history. As the new floorboards were laid and the walls were repaired, it felt like I was healing the house's wounds and my own. I decided to make the space my own, turning it into a cozy den and a playroom for Luna, with secure climbing structures and soft beds in the sunniest corners. It was a reclamation. The victory was not just legal, it was deeply personal. The house felt truly mine for the first time, the negative energy cast out by the law and a fresh coat of paint. Luna reclaimed her territory with gusto, chasing sunbeams across the new rug and no longer flinching at sudden sounds. We had won back our sanctuary. Months passed. The seasons changed, and the house settled back into a peaceful rhythm. I started a small online business from the sunlit morning room, finally feeling financially secure and independent. The story of my aunt and cousin's avarice and downfall became a piece of local lore, a cautionary tale that only solidified my place as the rightful, capable owner of the old Victorian. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Clara's lawyer. She and Simon, struggling under the weight of the restitution payments and their legal fees, were formally declaring bankruptcy. There was no apology, only a cold legal notification. I felt a pang of something, not pity, but a weary finality. Their greed had ultimately consumed them, leaving them with nothing but debt and the bitter regret of a plan that had catastrophically backfired. With the threat truly gone, I began to fully embrace the legacy my grandmother had left me. I started gardening in the overgrown but beautiful backyard, learning the names of the perennials she had planted decades ago. I hosted small dinners for a few close friends, filling the rooms with laughter and music, something the house had been missing. Luna was the undisputed queen of the domain, her confidence fully restored. She would greet guests at the door and hold court in the center of the living room. The house was no longer a burden or a prize to be fought over. It was a home, alive with love and new memories. I had not only defended it, I had earned it. A year after the incident, I was in the cellar den, reading a book, with Luna curled up in a perfect circle on my lap. My eyes fell upon a loose stone near the base of the rebuilt wall, one that the restoration guy had pointed out as original to the foundation. On a whim, I carefully wiggled it free. Behind it wasn't a fortune, but a small, tin box rusted shut. With some effort, I pried it open. Inside was not cash or jewels, but a stack of faded letters tied with a ribbon and a single, heavy gold locket. The letters were love letters from my grandfather to my grandmother, written during the war. The locket contained a tiny, faded photograph of them both, young and smiling. This was the real treasure. I held it to my chest, tears in my eyes. Clara and Simon had been looking for currency, but they had been too blind to see the true value hidden in plain sight. I had the locket cleaned and repaired, and began wearing it every day. It felt like a final blessing from my grandmother, a confirmation that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The story had come full circle. Their cruelty towards Luna had been the spark that ignited my resistance, and in the end, it had led me to the one thing that mattered most, a deeper connection to the love that had built this home. I realized my revenge was not truly in their legal punishment or financial ruin, satisfying as that was. My true victory was the peace and happiness I had built from the ashes of their malice. I had protected my family, which consisted of me and my cat, and in doing so, I had honored my grandmother's memory far better than they ever could. Now the house is filled with a profound and lasting peace. Luna spends her days in sun-drenched contentment, her past trauma a distant memory. As for me, I am no longer the anxious heir, but the confident guardian of a legacy. Sometimes I think of Clara and Simon, and I feel not hatred but a distant, almost philosophical pity. They messed with my cat, seeing her as a vulnerability. They never understood that she was in fact my strength. Her silent suffering was the catalyst that awakened a fierceness in me I never knew I possessed. They sought to drive me out through intimidation, but they only succeeded in rooting me more deeply to this land, this house, this life. They thought they were attacking a weakness. They didn't know they were poking a warrior. And in the end, they paid the price for that miscalculation, a debt of their own making, paid in full.
If you enjoyed this story of epic revenge, do me a huge favor. Smash that like button and make sure to subscribe for more tales of calculated justice, revenge, or karma, and let me know in the comments what you think about this story. Click the arrow button to watch another interesting story. Please note, your support helps keep the lights on and the stories coming. Thank you.